Hi there. My name is Daniel Krane. I'm with the Civilians, and today I'm speaking with playwright Crystal Skillman and songwriter Gaby Alter about their project, This Show Is Money, which is currently under development with the Civilians R&D Group this year. So Crystal and Gaby, I was hoping, could you just tell us a little bit about what This Show Is Money is? What are you guys working on right now?
It is, we have been interviewing all sorts of people, civilians, so to speak, with their relationship with money over the years, their perspective on it, and using those interviews to craft both scene work or interviews that are presented, some sung and some spoken, to really, investigate how money affects us in ways we can see and we can't see. In our current climate, and in our current climate, we're discovering a lot of new things as well. I would say, what do you think, Gaby? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't actually talked since this all happened. Since, as somebody I talked to yesterday said, this all went down.
This all went down.
Yeah, so I think that's what they said. But yeah, so I think it'll be really interesting because so much of what I think that the principal thing which we started with the idea that money is imaginary, right? Like it's a system of belief and trust that people made, like most things, but it's very apparent in this moment in some ways because of, it's like, oh, this thing happened, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we'll just cut everybody a check for $1,200, and actually probably a bunch more, and it's like, wait, what? So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to revisit it in light of what's happening.
And how did you guys first get interested in money as something to explore in a project?
We had actually been talking. Well, I think we had over the past few years, our mutual friend, Inamar Moses, suggested that we meet and talk, and we had been for a couple of years. We really love each other's work, and we'd always been thinking about something to work on together. And then we just happened to be drinking, talking projects again, and we started talking about that I was always fascinated that money was a fictional thing, and Gaby was as well. My husband had also, had this idea of a comic book. This comic book is money, which would much more follow the history of money and what it was. So we used that. We started talking about that. We started talking about Sapiens, and just our own upbringings and who we were, and just the idea of what money brings up for people, even symbolically. And we kind of looked at each other and we're like, I think we might have a show. Like, this is really fascinating. And then while we were drinking, we literally said, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like a civilian show." And I just said, "Oh my gosh, the application's due tomorrow. Do you want to apply?" And so that's how we started. And we so almost very close to the idea, we then had structure then to write the show that we felt like would be right for this kind of show.
Awesome. And could you guys just describe what the development process has been like so far for you guys? Has anything surprised you along the way as you've kind of dived into this research?
A lot. I actually, I don't know if you feel this way too, Gaby, about subjects, but I get excited and I start going, like, I just have an instinct and I start going. And then it's not until I'm in the middle of it that I'm like, wow, that you see some of the challenges, and that you also, I knew money would be a touchy subject, but from the minute we started bringing in interviews to the group, it was wonderful to have. First of all, this group has always been, whether I've been in it or not, I've, been a fan of everybody that's been through the group in the past few years. And it's a hive mind of genius. I mean, we have incredible writers and directors and creators and composers in this group. But right away, there was such a reaction from money, and even us asking questions for our interviewers. I started to understand, if I ask anyone on Wall Street, I'm going to get the runaround, and it just, I wasn't. It was an interesting surprise that I understood money brings up a lot for people, but I also began to understand how people either want to talk more about it, distance themselves from that, create their own fiction with it. And I would say the other thing that was surprising for me was the art and the act of interviewing. And I'm still trying to catch up with it because it's a lot of paperwork. Like I didn't quite realize, because this is my first kind of, I think, nonfiction piece. And making the interview, tracking the interview, transcribing the interview, seeing what it is first before I put my stamp on it. You know what I mean? Not that I'm going to put my stamp on it, but before I start to craft it, that was all very new to me. So that was surprising and really cool to discover.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, well, a couple of things, we weren't sure at the beginning, you know, we knew because we were doing with the Civilians that we were going to base it on interviews in part, but we also had this idea of a structure of doing it with characters that you followed and which each had like their own arc and storyline. And we brought in like a draft of the opening to our first meeting, and people were like, well, we are really interested in the interviews, but we're not as interested in this idea of like a fictional construct. Like we just are more interested in the raw interviews, which is, you know, more what the Civilians are known for. But I think that made sense, right? Because it's like, it's just fascinating to people to hear what other people honestly have to say about money and their relationships with money, because it's not something we are allowed to talk about a lot. And so that I think was interesting. And then for me, what I discovered, because Crystal's done most of the interviews, I did one so far.
But it's one heck of an interview. It
and
really is.
Yeah, with this woman that I was like, I know this is going to be interesting because I read an article by her about being rich, like being raised rich, and she's very critical of the ideas that people who are raised rich are raised with, sort of the idea of like why you're entitled to have so much more than other people. You know, this idea of, you know, we're exceptional. You know, your grandfather who made the money was this exceptional individual, as opposed to just like you were lucky, like. And so she talked about that in the interview, and I had done some work for her before, and so I was like, hey, would you be interested? You know, you seem like you're pretty open about talking about money. And she was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. You know, she's a fine artist, and she's like, my work is all about that. And so anyway, so I had a great interview with her, and it was really, for me, it was really enlightening. Not that it was like, she said things I expected about people who are raised very wealthy, but also like interesting to hear it from somebody who is critical of it. And, you know, somebody basically I feel like thinks the way I do, but who also had this background of like growing up with Warhols in their house, you know, like it's just, anyway, so that was really interesting and really enlightening.
I think she described her house kind of like a museum with beds.
Yeah.
At some point. And yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And, you know, but it's like she has some perspective on it. There's this group, Resource Generation, which is like younger people who are wealthy who are trying to figure out how to use their resource to actually help change things so that there's not so much inequality. So she was part of that. I mean, I think there is this consciousness among some people raised wealthy that like, this is wrong, basically. Like, and we can do something to divert the resources that we got by accident.
Has it been uncomfortable for you guys, or maybe charged at all, to enter in those conversations with people? Like, what has that been like for you guys personally to kind of lean into these conversations about people's opinions on money or experiences with it?
I think something that was newer for me, having done, I've done interviews before with actors that I was going to write for, but it was still fiction. So the idea of being anonymous or not anonymous, and having them at some point figure that out, that's like a whole new thing too. So I think it's I think I felt a lot like The Conversation, you know, that 70s movie with Gene Hackman, because number one, we're creating those things, but also the fact that the group can hear them. I can share them with the group, that Gaby can hear them. We can discuss and analyze as the team, because there are some things I miss that we pick up on. And in terms of following like being in it, sometimes it's as simple as not even being uncomfortable, but almost like as they're talking, they're creating a story. Sometimes it's riveting, but sometimes they're going in an area that really has to do more with, I don't know, them proving something to themselves. Then, so it's kind of just trying to get to the nitty gritty. And we found that on the first round, maybe I didn't feel like the questions were necessarily on the nose, but we then started to ask some questions that are that make the mind go in different directions, like objects. So what are the kind of objects in the house you had growing up? Because we actually found that objects and things in the house actually represented brought up conversations about money, whether it was this small thing has nothing to do with money or value, I keep it, or it came from this, or it was passed on. And so those kinds of questions they could answer right away. And allowances, that was interesting too. And like a really interesting detail that came up with a historian that writes about gentleman bankers from like JP Morgan and all of that world. She somehow we got to a story that when she gives a birthday present, she always to her nieces, they all get the same thing, because they're like, so if they get a Snoopy wallet, they all get the Snoopy wallet, like, and just little details like that about consideration, values, and these, then how people construct these things, where they come from, was really neat. And for some of the older people I interviewed, and again, I don't really think of age in a certain way, so it's kind of interesting. I didn't even realize, it's not until I get certain reference, like, Depression era farmer parents and Dust Bowl kind of things. I'm like, whoa, I didn't even, so they have a wealth of information in terms of money generationally that comes from war, coming through their parents and grandparents coming through wars and certain coming and immigration and all these interesting things that are coming up. So in a lot of ways too, it really made me reflect on our lives and where we're at. And I think the current climate also is going to bring up a lot of interesting things, because for certain generations, this is quite a shock. They haven't lived through war in the same way. So it's interesting.
That's great. And I wonder, for you guys, has doing this work changed at all how you think about your own relationships with money?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I might, I don't know. I'm still exploring how, if any of my history gets into the show, but I still find it like, I've become so interested in the fictional qualities of it in a way that like I'm still avoiding budgeting for myself. Like somehow I'm getting through stuff, but I have a relationship with debt that's kind of like, oh, well, I'll just get through this moment. So I have a pretty unhealthy relationship with money. So this is only exposing further. So I am thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I guess for me, I don't know yet. I think because yes, it sort of like starts with the idea of money as a fiction, and then we're asking questions. I think about, or I think we're asking questions, right, about where does money come from, but also like how does it get to the people that have it? Because the prevailing narrative in America and most places is, well, it gets there because people worked hard, they accumulated some, then they invested it, then they made more money, and that's not the reality at all. So, but I think even though I know that, or I think that as a left person on the left, that I still buy into the narrative of, well, money is sort of where it should be. It's sort of allocated sort of where it should be. And I think the more we do this, the more that's like called into question. But I don't know that, it's sort of, I don't feel like it's sort of totally radicalized my personal life yet. But it has made me think about it more. And I think that's in general, I think that's as a society where we're headed, is to question why things are like, why does Amazon pay no taxes, but poor people pay like massive taxes? Like, how does that make sense in any rational way? And it doesn't, but so I think we're coming to grips with that as a society and also as individuals now.
Awesome.
And I think the bigger conversation, like, I think what's interesting about the show now in the terms of some of the interviews we'll do and keep doing post this COVID, is that it exposed in through journalism and interviews with other people like that are out, budgets that people weren't talking about or seeing. So like, WeWork, that was so you know, oh my gosh, this happened, you know, now everybody is looking like the budgets are bare, I think, for everybody. And I think the minimum wage conversation, which has always been floating around, you know, is now, I think people are just seeing in a very naked way, including artists, like just what they've been standing on and what they've been a part of, and how, like, this thing I've always hoping the show could do, I think it is providing for those looking for it, transparency into where is the money coming from, going, how is it being misused, how is it not getting to people that need it. You know, I think these images of people not being able to get hospital equipment, I mean, has been, you know, where is that coming from? Like, how politically is this happening? I mean, it just opened up. And I think also the political race is becoming dynamic and interesting. And obviously, for those following Bernie, and I was, you know, I'm a fan of Bernie. So this was difficult, but also seeing a team form around, you know, a party that is having trouble, but also the fact that they're going to work together. So there is a despair a little bit about like these kinds of changes, but I think there's also, if you look for them, these threads we're starting to see about a hope of, you know, I mean, it's easier. I know it's really scary, but it might be easier to rebuild from this kind of nakedness than what we were trying to do before, which felt like a lot of Band-Aids. And I think that's what we've been seeing, is those Band-Aids, and what happens if you pull them off and look at them. And yeah.
It seems like an exciting, maybe a bit scary time to be sharing this kind of work too, but maybe this is when we really need to be having this kind of conversation about money and how it works in our society. Awesome. Gaby, I think you have a song from the show that you were...
I do have a song, yeah, so we'll see how it goes, but this is my rehearsal and performance. But yeah, this song is currently our opening number, and it's about the history of money. There's something, it really, one of my defaults tends to be just like being literal. Like, it's like, all right, we're writing a show about money, so let's write a song about the history of money. But also, Crystal, right? I mean, I think that was in some ways our intent. Like, we wanted to actually talk about the processes of money, so as to demystify them. And we talked about The Big Short as
The Big Short, yeah.
Where, you know, it's like, it's a hilarious, entertaining movie in which people, or Margot Robbie in a bathtub tells you about like tranches, and you're like, oh, I didn't understand tranches before, but now that Margot Robbie's explaining it, and sort of like sexy but also hilarious, that she's making a joke out of how we can't pay attention to anything unless there's like a, you know, beautiful person in a bathtub.
Full disclosure, you have another fan here, but see if we can persuade him away. But yeah, agreed. And I think a big part of the as we're talking, even in the group, there are certain things that's about money and systems that some of us have known better than others, and myself, and even, you know, so there is an educational component in a way too for an audience too, just in terms of some of us, you know, have had to deal with immediate needs and understand things sooner than others. And so I think, you know, what does it mean that how does a bank really work? Like, just these things that we know vaguely, but like, you know, or know very well. But I think the show also talks about things that you may not have been putting together, or to the level of understanding how it works, you hasn't quite popped for you. So we hope the show will do that.
Okay, so this is, I think we call the song I Believe. Promise me, I'll promise you, promise me, I promise, trust in me, I'll trust in you, trust in me, I promise. In 9000 BC we used to barter, it was all concrete, there was nothing abstract. I took the surplus goods in my larder, I and traded them for the ones that I lack. But as society grew ever more complicated, job specialization made it hard to agree on the exchange value of our goods. So then we traded things that everyone needed, like grain, cattle, and tea. But they were hard to transport. Hey, these cows are heavy. There were problems with storage. Grains easily spoil. So people started using things like cowrie shells, and later on useless metals that they found in the soil. And we were like, aha, these are lightweight and durable, plus they're insurable by the emperor's seal. So though it's true that these things are just arbitrary and their value is imaginary, we'll make it real. Cause I believe, and you believe, and we put our trust in the emperor. If you believe, we agree, we can put our trust in the stranger. And there is cooperation across borders and nations between Greeks and Thracians with no hesitation. Cause no matter what your deity or country of birth, everybody could agree on what these coins were worth. And they converted anything into anything else, like apples into Cadillac, shoes into wine. And because of the system, everybody could trust it. You could get what you wanted and you could get it on top. Cause I believe that you believe that we'll make this dream a reality. If you believe, I believe that we agree, no matter our God or nationality. If the bank loans me $1 for my business, it's because they believe in my future profits. Though the dollars I will make do not yet exist, they believe, and I believe, we believe in the future. My profits will increase. If my profits increase, everybody gets a piece, cause I reinvest my profits and my staff gets bigger. As my staff gets bigger, everybody's piece is bigger. The economy keeps growing and there's no slowing down. We reinvest the profits, benefits go flowing down. From top to bottom, everybody's got a holy cow. Isn't that how it works? Just look around you, I believe, you believe, we believe. So we put our trust in the future. What's up ahead, we don't dread it. We create lines of credit and we reinvest in the future. Overseas colonies, new technologies, the cycle never ceases. We all get bigger pieces. Slowing down, we will never, we'll keep growing forever. We'll keep growing forever. We'll keep growing forever. Growing forever, we'll keep growing forever. Isn't that how it works? Just look around you now. Just look around you now. Just look around you now.
Amazing.
Thanks. That's something has so many words.
No, that was
the actors in the future.
well. But speaking of actors in the future, we're all very excited to hopefully be sharing some of what you guys have been working on in the upcoming weeks. So, so stay tuned for. Stay tuned.
You're muted, Chris.
Stay tuned for sharing
happened.
from the R&D group. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for sharing.
Bye.
Bye.